What's the idiot date you've ever been on? Story 1. It was my second date with this guy, and he said the exact same things he had said on the first date, word for word. The same stories, the same random thoughts, the same questions. It freaked me out so much that, at first, I just played along and answered exactly as I had before, as if we were both following some bizarre script. Eventually, I tried to break the pattern by asking him new things, but he kept steering the conversation back to the same topics as last time. It felt like I was stuck in some kind of glitching computer program. Even now, thinking about it gives me chills. Story 2. I went out with a girl to a nice Japanese restaurant. I got there first and waited at the bar. She walked in, saw me, and immediately turned around and left without a word. Confused, I followed her outside and asked if she was okay. She just said, "I can't really be in there right now." So we went to an Irish pub instead. But the conversation was painfully awkward. Long silences, forced small talk. After about 45 minutes, I told her that it was clear this wasn't working, and we didn't have to force it. I offered to take her back to her car, which was parked at my house, and we said goodnight. But just as I was about to go inside, she suddenly asked if I wanted to grab a drink at the bar across the street. I said sure. We ended up having a great time, got a little too drunk, went back to my place, and well, let's just say the night ended a lot better than it started. We've now been married for 10 years. She struggles with anxiety that comes and goes. And for whatever reason, the atmosphere at that Japanese restaurant really triggered it. She just needed some time to shake it off. Story 3. This happened about 5 years ago. I had just moved to London and met a guy on a dating site. He wasn't really my type, but I had just gotten out of a long-term, toxic relationship and was trying to meet new people. Figured I'd give it a shot. Fast forward to the date. We were at a pub when he took a call from a girl. I heard him say, "Oh, I'm just out with his male roommate's name." But I could also hear the girl on the other end getting upset and him trying to calm her down. Immediate red flags. When he hung up, he casually told me, "That was my fiancé, but not a real one, just someone I'm with for her visa." At that point, I was already thinking, what the hell? But then he kept going. "She also lives with me," he added, explaining that they shared his 2-bedroom apartment with another roommate. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he threw in, "Oh yeah, I should probably mention, I'm getting married in 3 weeks." Right then and there, I grabbed my coat and said, "Well, I'm going home." And his response, "Do you want to help me buy groceries first?" Story 4. Met a girl on Match. She showed up 20 minutes late. I had to excuse myself and hide in the bathroom just to write down all the insane things she was saying before I forgot them. Topics included, but were not limited to: daddy issues, her mother loving her brother more, a miscarriage, being married before, when we start dating, when we get married, setting me up with her assistant, how she would sleep with me with blood on my face, things she does when she's high, Brazilian trance music, adopting children, forgetting my dog's name, why she doesn't trust animated movies, why she was 20 minutes late owning a business when it's acceptable to use a certain offensive word, being a vegetarian, her blind cat, her dying uncle, abusive relationships, the city of Tampa, free-range urination, and whether we could order tater tots. We didn't go out again. Story 5. We had been talking on the phone for about a month. One day he told me his car had been booted right outside his house. He launched into a long, drawn-out story about how he couldn't get the boot removed. His dad was staying with him, so he had planned to use his dad's car, but now that wasn't an option either. So I drove over to pick him up for dinner. The moment he got in my car, he started panicking, saying, "Oh great, now I'm in the car with you, and I'm going to get accused of something." I asked him what the hell he was talking about, but he just kept rocking back and forth in his seat, anxious and rambling about being falsely accused. I ignored it, drove to the nearest food spot, and asked him where he wanted to eat. He said he had no money and just wanted to go home. So I took him home. And then, right before getting out of my car, he asked if he could borrow $20. For some reason, I gave it to him. After that, he kept calling me. I ignored every single one. Then he started texting, asking why he wasn't good enough for me to date. I kept ignoring him. Fast forward 3 years, I came across him again on a dating site. He messaged me, not realizing we had already met. He told me his long-term girlfriend had passed away a year ago, the woman he had supposedly lived with for 10 years. which meant he hadn't been staying with his dad when I met him. He had been living with his girlfriend, the same girlfriend who was inside the house when I picked him up that night. I called him out on it, and he tried to pretend I had the wrong guy. But he had the same name, worked at the same place, and looked exactly the same. Very bizarre. Story 6. I've posted this before because it was so weird. I went out for dinner with a girl I met through a dating app, and things were going really well. We started talking about movies and decided to see Inception. She mentioned a cinema nearby, but since I wasn't familiar with the area, I used the GPS on my phone while she held it and directed me. Once we got to the theater, we started walking inside and I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I said I must have left it in the car and started heading back to get it. She kept insisting I leave it, saying we would miss the movie, but the phone was barely a week old, so I wasn't about to risk losing it. We searched the car for about 10 minutes but couldn't find it. I asked her to check her jacket and bag just in case, but she said it wasn't there. A couple parked next to us, so I asked if they could call my number. It started ringing from inside my date's handbag. She pulled it out and said she must have missed it. I thanked the couple, locked my car, and turned back toward the theater, only to see her walking away. I ran to catch up and asked what was going on, but she barely responded, acting cold and dismissive. That's when it hit me. She had taken my phone on purpose. I just left her there to walk home alone. Story 7. During my freshman year of college, I had a crush on a girl from my high school. When I finally asked her out, she told me she only dated women. I'm a guy. But she insisted we were still friends and even offered to be my wingman. I figured, why not? A few weeks later, she set me up on a semi-blind date with one of her friends. Let's call her Monica. The three of us met at Arby's, because we were fancy like that, and my friends started playing matchmaker. Pimp Ninja Man loves theater, and so do you, Monica. Monica loves music, and so do you, Pimp Ninja Man. The date was going fine, so my friend left Monica and me alone. We kept talking and decided to see a movie. Since I didn't have a car, Monica offered to drive. That's when things got weird. About 2 minutes after leaving Arby's, Monica got a phone call. She said it was her roommate and that she had to answer. I heard a man's voice on the other end, which caught me off guard, but I figured it wasn't that unusual for a girl to have a male roommate. They got into an argument, and Monica suddenly pulled into a gas station. Another car pulled up right next to us. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Then Monica turned to me and said, I need to go talk to my roommate. Just wait here for a minute. I assumed she just wanted privacy, but what happened next still haunts me. She got out and went to talk to the driver of the car that had just pulled in. That's when I started panicking. What were the odds that her roommate just happened to be right here? I heard some yelling, and my brain immediately shifted into escape mode. A moment later, Monica opened my car door and said, Hey, I'm really sorry, but my roommate is going to have to take you home. This is the part of the movie where someone in the audience screams, Don't go with him! That's how people disappear. I wish I could say I got smart and walked away, but I didn't. Some combination of confusion and curiosity made me get into this stranger's car. Luckily, I was in my hometown, so I knew if he drove in the wrong direction, I could jump out and run. The guy was big. I was 6 feet 2 inches at the time, and he was significantly larger. I don't remember his name, so let's just call him Ross. Ross started driving in silence. Then out of nowhere, he said, So how do you know Monica? I could tell something sketchy was going on, so I played it cool. Oh, we have a mutual friend, I said casually. He nodded and kept driving. Then, as if he had been mid-conversation in his own head, he suddenly blurted out, Yeah. A lot of people at our church are upset that Monica and I live together. They just assume we're, but it shouldn't even matter since we're engaged. That's when it all clicked. My lesbian friend had just set me up on a date with an engaged girl, and now I was sitting in her fiance's car. I stayed silent the rest of the ride. When we got close to campus, I lied about my dorm location so he wouldn't know where I lived. Then I got out of the car and walked around for a while, just processing what had happened. Definitely the weirdest date I've ever been on. Story 8. I met this guy when I was in college in D.C., and he invited me to ride on his motorcycle out to his family's farm in rural Virginia. When I told my best friend, she was horrified. He could be an axe murderer. You could end up in a dozen pickle jars. I brushed off her concerns and went anyway, taking the 2-hour ride out to the farm. Once we arrived, we took a walk up the mountain behind the farm. He picked wildflowers for me along the way, and we had a great time watching wild turkeys. But as we were walking back down, I spotted a fence with a tree growing next to it and thought it would be fun to swing myself over like Tarzan. Bad idea. There was a massive rock right where I landed, and I took a nasty tumble, spraining my ankle pretty badly. We hobbled back to the farmhouse, which was really just a two-room cottage. And once we got my boot off, it was clear I wasn't going to get it back on. There was no way I was riding home that afternoon. That's when he said, "Looks like we'll have to spend the night here and wait for the swelling to go down." And all I could think was, pickle jars. He rode into town to pick up some food. There was nothing in the house. And when he got back, he asked, "Guess what's for dinner?" Jokingly, I said, "Chicken Kiev." It was the most random, unlikely thing I could think of. His face fell. Turns out he had actually picked up the ingredients to make chicken Kiev, thinking it would impress me. That should have been a sign. We've now been married 31 years and have 2 kids. Story 9. A girl I knew, who I was sort of interested in but didn't know that well, asked me out. She suggested an open-air jazz concert. Not really my thing, but sure. The moment we got there, she was all over me, hugging, sitting on my lap, acting like we'd been together for years. Things were going great, or so I thought. Then I started noticing something weird. Several band members kept looking at us strangely while playing. One of the piano players was even mouthing words in our direction, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. When I went to grab drinks, people were rude to me for no apparent reason. It felt like I had done something wrong, but I had no idea what. Long story short, my date knew almost everyone at that concert. And the reason she had invited me? To publicly get back at her very large boyfriend for cheating on her. I was just a clueless pawn. The awkward ending? I ran into both of them later that night at the train station. She acted like she didn't even see me. No hard feelings, jazz fans. I was just an innocent bystander. Story 10. I went on a Tinder date with a guy who is now saved in my contacts as "Do Not Answer, Pennispic." Before the date, he seemed normal. We texted, talked on the phone, and eventually arranged to meet at a restaurant bar. He was cute, but definitely had a bitter edge to him. He had recently moved from California and apparently wasn't a fan of this new city. Early into the conversation, he started talking about city, specifically how uptight people here are about it, and complaining about how no one is as open as they should be. He casually invited our waitress to a party his company was throwing, right after sending back his order of French fries. I tried to change the subject and showed him a picture of my dog on my phone. He responded by pulling out his phone and showing me a picture of his. Well, let's just say it wasn't a dog. We walked out of the restaurant together to get our cars from the valet. My car arrived first, so I left without looking back. Later, he texted me saying he had my sweater. I must have dropped it on the way out. But instead of just returning it, he told me that if I wanted to see it again, I'd have to hang out with him. Story 11. Okay, I've never shared this story online before, but here goes. I was supposed to have a second date with this girl. She told me there were 3 different parties happening that night, so she suggested we hit all 3. Sounded fun to me, so off we went. At the first party, she ran into her best friend from college, someone she hadn't seen in 4 years. The moment they spotted each other, they took off, leaving me alone with the friend's boyfriend. I figured it wasn't a big deal. They had years to catch up, and we still had the whole night ahead of us. Eventually, she returned and suggested we head to the next party. Great. At the second party, she immediately ran off again, this time to greet another friend. "Tim! Oh my God, how have you been?" she shouted before dashing across the room. I slowly followed behind, but she never acknowledged me or made it clear she wanted me to come along. She didn't introduce me to anyone, didn't say anything about me. I was just there. After standing around awkwardly for a while, I went to the bathroom, only to find the door had been ripped off its hinges. I found a screwdriver, fixed the door, then finally used the bathroom. About 30 minutes later, my date reappeared and suggested we head to the final party. But this time, her friend Tim was coming with us. We arrived at the third party, and the second we walked in, Tim announced that he needed cigarettes. My date and Tim then immediately left to go buy them, leaving me, yet again, alone at a party full of strangers. 45 minutes passed before they finally returned. By then, I had made up my mind. I was done. As soon as she walked back in, I told her I was heading home. That's when she flipped out. She started screaming at me in front of everyone about how she was planning to sleep with me later and how I had ruined everything. Then, as if she needed to have the final word, she dramatically yelled, "You're not leaving me! I'm leaving you!" and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. So now I was standing there, abandoned, while everyone at the party, people I did not know, just stared at me. Thankfully, someone eventually walked over, handed me a drink and said, "Dude, that was insane." I ended up staying for another hour, laughing it off with the people at the party. Still friends with some of those fine people today. Story 12. A friend set up a double date with a girl he was dating during our sophomore year of college. She said she'd bring a friend, explicitly stating it was a female friend. My buddy and I met her and her friend at a bowling alley for rock and bowl. Turns out her friend was actually her male cousin, who was 15. Then she proceeded to spend the entire night talking to her cousin and ignoring my friend completely. So, my buddy and I just decided to have a great time bowling and chatting with other people at the alley instead. Afterward, we all went to Applebee's for some late-night appetizers, and she still completely ignored my friend. So, we made it our goal to get the waiters and waitresses around us to laugh as much as possible. Later, we headed back to my friend's mom's house so I could get my car. We told her what happened, and she just shook her head and said, "So, you two basically went on a date with each other." Story 13. Met a guy online, of course, and after talking for a couple of weeks, we decided to go out. He claimed his car had broken down that morning, so I agreed to meet him at his house. When I arrived, he was dressed like an extra greasy version of the Fonz. I tried to look past it, but in my head, I was already plotting ways to destroy his leather jacket and dispose of his pomade. Then I stepped inside his house. It was disgusting. If you know someone is coming over for the first time, maybe, just maybe, wipe down the counters and get rid of the old pizza boxes. We went to dinner, and the entire time, he never once asked me anything about myself. Instead, he rambled on for over an hour about his job as a customer service rep, repeatedly comparing it to my job as a 911 dispatcher. Apparently, they were basically the same thing. On top of that, he kept telling me how much smarter and more attractive I was than his ex-girlfriend, who he only referred to as the bitch ex. After dinner, he wanted to go to a movie. But after spending an hour listening to him drone on and watching him constantly puff on his smelly vaporizer, the thought of sitting through an entire movie next to him was unbearable. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I told him I thought I had mild food poisoning and needed to get him home before I made a mad dash for my own bathroom. The second I realized I'd rather fake an emergency bowel situation than sit through a movie with this guy, I knew there wasn't going to be a second date. Within 1 minute of me leaving, he started texting about how great our date was and pushing for another one. When I finally responded, I told him he seemed like a great guy, but our personalities didn't really mesh. That's when he completely lost it. He started ranting about how he'd never sleep with a fat, ugly bitch like me anyway, and that I should be grateful he had lowered himself enough to take me out in the first place. Oh, and he hoped I died. Safe to say, I didn't feel bad about passing on a second date. Haven't been on a date since. I've decided spinsterhood is more my style. Story 14. Met a girl online, hit it off, and while she seemed a bit immature, I figured, why not? She casually mentioned that she really liked pigs. What she meant to say was that she was obsessed with pigs. Obsessed. We went to one of the nicest restaurants in town for our first date. Mistake number one. Sometimes people look different from their photos or they hide things about themselves. But that wasn't the problem here. She looked exactly like her pictures. But I didn't even need to see her face because everything else gave it away. She walked in wearing a giant t-shirt with a sparkly pink pig on it. Her earrings, pig-shaped. Bracelets, pig-themed. She even had a headband with a tiny pig on top. Her shoes? You guessed it, pigs on the toes. But the best part? She carried a giant, or at least felt giant, pink purse with a pig's face on it. Once you noticed it, you couldn't unsee it, and neither could anyone else in that upscale restaurant. I felt overdressed next to her, but underdressed compared to every other couple there. It was beyond embarrassing. For some reason, which I tell myself was politeness, not stupidity, I stayed for dinner. But let me tell you, it was the fastest meal I've ever had at a sit-down restaurant. At some point, I accidentally blurted out, "Oh, you really like pigs." She immediately started giggling, oinking, then launched into a full-blown speech about how everything in her life was pig-themed, and she would not stop. There were plenty of other things that made the night a disaster, but that was the final straw. Easily a 0 out of 5 date. Afterward, I had to tell someone, so I vented to a friend of a friend. Then I promptly buried this memory as my worst dating experience ever. Story 15. I was on a train coming home from work when I spotted this gorgeous girl. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Then it hit me. I used to go to church with her, like 15 years ago. We had never been friends. Back then, I was in that early puberty phase where being mean to girls was my way of interacting with them. But hey, that was a long time ago. I walked up to her, asked how she'd been, what she was up to. Reconnecting. She told me where she worked, and it turned out we worked just a block apart in the city. So, I asked if she wanted to grab lunch one day. The next day I texted her, and we met up for lunch. It was going great, but something felt off. She was asking very general first date questions. While I was happy to answer, it was bothering me. Then it hit me. She didn't remember me. I must have come across as so confident and friendly when I approached her on the train that she just agreed to the date. Meanwhile, I thought I was reconnecting with someone from my past, and she had no idea who I was. Well, the date went great anyway. She had the next day off, so we made plans to meet up again. Fast forward to that night, I got a text from her. I just remembered who you are. Don't text me again. Don't come near me on the train. Apparently, 12-year-old me had been a massive jerk. Story 16. I was talking to a girl on Tinder who I really hit it off with. We made plans to meet up later that weekend. Let's call her Sarah. The next day, another girl I had chatted with, let's call her Sophie, told me she'd be out at a bar near me. She invited me to come join her and even told me to bring a friend. So I grabbed my roommate and we went to meet Sophie. When we got to the bar, I spotted Sophie sitting with another girl whose back was turned to me. I walked up, gave Sophie a quick hug, and sat down next to her, motioning for my buddy to take the seat next to the other girl. That's when I finally looked at Sophie's friend. The first thing I noticed was the intense stare I was getting from across the table. Then realization struck. It was Sarah. The same Sarah I had made plans to meet the following day. She looked just as stunned as I did. For what felt like an eternity, we sat there, both frozen, wide-eyed, caught in the most awkward surprise of our lives. Then Sophie, oblivious to it all, finally broke the silence. Hey, Sebus, this is my bestie. Her name's Sarah. Cue nervous handshakes, fake introductions, and an awkward exchange of names, despite already knowing exactly who we were. Neither of us knew what to do. We didn't want to acknowledge the massive elephant in the room since Sophie and my roommate had no clue what was going on. Somehow, things actually worked out. My roommate and Sarah ended up talking and really hitting it off. It was as if we had silently, mutually agreed to just not mention the glowing mammoth in the room. In the end, the girls ended up coming back to our place and spending the night. I only told my roommate why I had looked so confused after they left the next day. But yeah, that was probably the strangest date I've ever been on. And somehow it actually worked out. Story 17. This one is easy. Met a girl online, and our conversations were always friendly, just lighthearted, getting to know you banter. After chatting for a while, we made plans to meet up at a bar near her place. The plan for the evening? A few drinks, then heading back to her place to play Donkey Kong Country on Super Nintendo. Being the oblivious guy that I am, I was genuinely excited to play some DKC. We met up at the bar, and things went fine. I wasn't really attracted to her, but she was nice, and we had an all right time. After a while, we headed back to her place and started watching TV. I looked around but didn't see a Super Nintendo. Maybe it's in her bedroom, I thought, but I didn't want to be rude by asking. She made us drinks, and we started watching Drunk History. Then out of nowhere, she turned to me with murder in her eyes and said, "Are we going to stop playing games?" I smiled, trying to play it off. "Do you mean Donkey Kong Country?" She did not appreciate that. She scoffed and started going off about how guys are always playing games and only want one thing. I told her the only game I wanted to play was Donkey Kong Country. That's when things got weird. She got up from the couch, walked calmly into the kitchen, and pulled out a butcher knife. Then she just stood there, silent, staring at me, holding the knife at her side. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then I jumped up and bolted for the front door. I didn't even bother closing it behind me. As I ran, I heard her door slam shut, followed by her screaming at the top of her lungs. So, what I thought was going to be a fun, relaxed night of friendly conversation and Donkey Kong Country turned into my maybe I could have been murdered dating story. Story 18. About 8 months ago, I went on a Tinder date. She suggested brunch at Max's Wine Dive on McKinney. We're in Dallas. I picked her up at her apartment in Victory Park. She wasn't ready when I arrived, so she buzzed me in. Her apartment was beautiful, tons of high-end stuff, no roommate. We went to brunch at 1 p.m. She drank an entire bottle of champagne by herself. Afterwards, she said she wanted to stop by a shop in West Village. I parked in the garage, got out, and looked around for her. But she wasn't next to me. Then I heard something. I turned around, and there she was, squatting next to the wall, peeing on the ground. I pretended not to see anything. We went into the shop. She grabbed a few dresses and told me to come over. I stood outside the dressing room, but she pulled me inside. Then she completely undressed in front of me, put on a new outfit, asked what I thought, undressed again, changed into another outfit, over and over. Eventually, she took about $1,500 worth of clothes to the counter. But as the cashier started ringing them up, my date suddenly really had to use the restroom. The cashier said no. My date begged. The cashier finally caved and took her to the back. Too late. She also bought a new pair of pants. On the way back to her apartment, she got a phone call and started speaking in a language I couldn't place. I couldn't even guess the continent. She sounded nervous, very nervous. When she hung up, she told me she had to stop by her other apartment at Cirque, also in Victory Park. We went inside and, again, it was her place. No roommate. While she was distracted, I started playing with a telescope she had set up near the window. Then in the mirror, I saw her open a safe and put something in her purse. She turned to me and said, "We need to leave." Then she asked if she could go back to my place. We got to my house and she immediately passed out for 6 hours. When she woke up, she wanted Dairy Queen. It was closed. She started crying. So I took her to Sonic. She ordered a cheeseburger, a chili dog, cheese fries, and a sundae. We got back to my house, she ate it all, threw up, and passed out again on my couch. I just grabbed a book and went to bed. The next morning, she asked if she could stay and watch football. I told her I had plans and needed to take her home. That's when she said she couldn't go to either of her apartments. I told her too bad, dropped her off at Cirque. She texted me later, asking when we could see each other again. I never responded. Story 19. This story isn't as wild as some, but it's definitely my strangest. A guy I'd met a few times reached out and asked me on a date. I had never been asked out before, so despite hearing some odd things about his family, I said yes. He picked me up, and things seemed fine. We decided to grab a pizza and eat at a park. When we got to the pizza place, I found out he worked there, and all his coworkers came out to stare at me. It was painfully obvious this guy wasn't very popular with women and was using our date to prove he had one. I got super uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to bail, so we still went to the park. It was awkward, almost no conversation. Mostly just sitting in silence, trying not to hear each other chewing. I thought I was finally going home, but instead, he decided we had to stop at his house. I didn't know how to say no, first dating experience, so I went along with it. Turns out his house was actually his parents' house. That wouldn't have been so bad, except all 10 of his siblings. I lost count, but it was a lot, and both parents were home, and they wanted to meet me. They weren't just a big, nice family. They were very religious and looked like they belonged to a cult. Homemade clothes, long hair, homeschooled. His mom greeted me first. Then his dad walked in, and suddenly no one was allowed to speak while he questioned me. He asked exactly what his son and I had done on our date, and when the family would be seeing me again. It was terrifying. My date eventually took me to his room to show me his pet turtles, which were actually really cute. Then he finally drove me home. Before I could leave, he tried to kiss me, and also made it clear that he thought we were in a relationship after one date. At that point, I practically ran from the car. Later, I messaged him, politely explaining that I was only looking for friends. Story 20. I was a waitress and had a table with two guys. One of them was really cute, flirting with me, and we ended up exchanging numbers. He asked me out, and I said yes. I didn't go out much at the time, and he didn't tell me where we were going or what we were doing. Being young and naive, I thought that added to the excitement. He drove me quite a distance from my house, and we ended up at an elementary school. I was really confused. Apparently, he was a basketball coach, and there was a game that night. At that point, I noticed I had no reception on my phone. I wanted to leave, but I figured maybe we'd go somewhere fun afterward. So I gave up trying to call someone to pick me up. I sat through the entire game, right next to his mom. Yeah, things were going great. Finally, the game ended, and we got in the car. Then his friend from the restaurant got into the front seat, leaving me in the back. I immediately felt uncomfortable and asked what was going on. That's when they made it clear they had other intentions. Nope, absolutely not. I told them to take me home immediately. Luckily, they gave up and took me back. I was terrified. That was one of the worst experiences of my life. Story 21. I have so many bad dates, I could probably write a book. But let's start with the first truly awful one. I was set up with the son of one of my mother's friends from our synagogue. He picked me up at my parents' house. We were around 16 or 17. We hadn't even been driving for 10 minutes, just on our way to a restaurant, when he turned to me and asked, completely straight-faced, if I would rather take care of him before or after dinner. I froze. Surely I misheard him. So I asked, "Excuse me?" And he just smiled and repeated himself, speaking slowly, like I was hard of hearing. That was it for me. I snapped and told him to go to hell and to pull over. I kept shouting for him to stop the car. He started panicking but eventually pulled over. The moment he did, I got out and started walking home. He followed me for a few blocks, driving slowly with the window down, begging me not to tell his mom or mine. I ignored him completely, so he got frustrated, called me some nasty names, and sped off. It took me about an hour to walk home. This was before cell phones. And when I told my mom what happened, she was mortified. She immediately called his mother and told her everything. Instead of being horrified, the guy's mom tried to blame me, claiming I must have led him on. That was the last time my mom ever spoke to her. Other bad dates I've had: a magician, a Craigslist personal ad gone wrong, a nurse looking for drugs, a married man, and so much more. Story 22. This wasn't my date, but I went home with a guy I had been seeing, and when we got there, his roommate was curled up on the couch, looking shaken. We asked him what was wrong. At first, he wouldn't say anything, but after a while, he finally told us what happened. He had taken a girl home from the bar, and they started drunkenly undressing as soon as they got through the bedroom door. She mentioned that she was self-conscious, so she asked him to turn off the lights. He did, and they continued fooling around. Then out of nowhere, he noticed a horrible smell. He said something about it, but she told him to ignore it, claiming he was imagining things. Eventually, the stench became unbearable, so he switched the lights back on, and that's when he saw it. There was no other way to say this. Literal mess everywhere. All over her, all over the bed. He was so shocked that all he could do was yell, "Oh my God!" She immediately grabbed her clothes and ran out of the apartment without saying a word, still in the same state. He threw out his bedding, took an hour-long shower, and refused to go back into his room that night. It pretty much killed our evening, too. To this day, I still wonder what happened. Was it intentional and she hoped he'd be into it? Or was it an accident and she just tried to roll with it? Honestly, I don't know which scenario is worse. Story 23. I should probably use a throwaway account for this, but whatever. I met someone from Tinder. We had talked on the phone, and she seemed pretty upfront and real. Her profile said she was 20, and I never questioned it. She mentioned having a rough childhood and that she had moved a few states away, staying in an apartment with her mom. It seemed reasonable, a girl down on her luck. One day I was around her area and decided to text her to see if she was free. She wasn't busy and invited me over. When I arrived, she came out barefoot and asked if I wanted to walk around the neighborhood. It was winter, and now we were walking around an apartment complex while she was barefoot. There was a grocery store across the street, and she wanted to run in for jelly beans. I didn't ask many questions, so in we went. She was still barefoot, heading straight for the candy section. She grabbed a few handfuls from the jelly bean dispenser and shoved them into her pockets. I didn't want to end up on a security tape with someone stealing candy, so I insisted on buying some for her. She said, "No, I'm giving you a story to tell your friends later." She then bought a jar of pickles with the money she had. We went back to her place, and I started to feel uneasy. When we got to her room, I noticed a lot of red flags. A shotgun leaning against the corner, a filthy bong beside her bed, and a blow-up chair for seating. Then I saw school books and a backpack in the corner. Trying to be polite, I asked, "Oh, do you go to the local community college?" She replied, "No, I go to school name." It hit me. "Wait, like the high school?" She said, "Yes." I asked, "How old are you?" She responded, 16, but it's legal in this state, so what's the problem? I was out of there immediately. Story 24. I was about 16, and my cousin tried to set me up with her friend, who I had shown interest in after meeting her at a family gathering. We texted and talked for a couple of weeks, and then we agreed to meet at the mall. When I got there, she showed up with another guy who she introduced as her boyfriend. Apparently, he was her ride to the mall. My cousin didn't think this was odd at all. I was pretty annoyed, especially since the girl was really attractive. The three of us walked around the mall while her boyfriend waited in the car. She kept trying to get me to buy her things, but I said I didn't have the money for that. She tried holding my hand and even asked me to get her something from the food court. I ended up getting her something small to eat. After a while, I told my cousin I was ready to leave. That's when the girl said, "You're cute and sweet. You should totally be my guy." I was stunned. "Don't you already have a boyfriend?" She replied, "I could have two. Besides, he's just my brother. I don't have to commit to him." I was done. I said, "No, thank you," and left. My cousin was confused and didn't seem to understand why I had an issue with the situation. To this day, I'm still weirded out by that encounter. Story 25. Years ago, I met a girl online. After we exchanged photos and lists of interests, we started talking on the phone and hit it off right away. She lived about an hour away and suggested we go hiking and have a picnic at a national park. When I arrived to pick her up, I noticed she had packed a tent, sleeping bags, a cooler, and enough camping equipment for a full weekend. I thought we were just going hiking, but she said, "I figured we could just camp out overnight. Just get me back home in time for church in the morning." We headed out, set up the tent, went for a hike, swam in the lake, had dinner, and settled in for the night around a campfire. Later in the tent, things started happening. But then she suddenly said, "Can we wait a bit on that and just go to sleep?" I agreed, and we slept. In the early morning hours, she woke me up to let me know that the wait was over. Afterwards, she started crying and said she wasn't ready for a relationship. I told her I understood, even though I was confused. We packed up and headed back. I dropped her off at her house. About 15 minutes later, I got a call from my dad. He sounded angry and asked me what I was doing. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He said, "The sheriff's department just came by looking for you. They said you're wanted in the disappearance of some girl. Her family said she never came home last night. They went to your place first, but no one was there." Apparently, her family freaked out when she missed church, thinking she'd been kidnapped. I called her and begged her to contact the sheriff and let them know she was safe. She laughed it off and then called them. There was no second date. Story 26. I met a girl online and we decided to go on a date. I'm female, by the way. This sort of matters. I arrived in a town I didn't know, so I relied on her to show me around. She took me to a youth LGBT group. I thought we were staying and I didn't mind. It was a little odd, but I was newly out, so I went along with it. Turns out she just wanted to prove to everyone that she actually had a date. Apparently they didn't believe her, and I was her proof. It was incredibly awkward. When the youth group leader came in, she stood up, grabbed my hand and said, "Later, everyone," before walking us out. We went to a bar for a drink and then out for some food. It wasn't going well, she was acting really strange. But I was new to dating, and I was in an unfamiliar town. After we ate, she said, "Oh, I just need to see a friend who's staying at hotel name." I didn't think much of it until we got there. Turns out she had actually booked a hotel room for the night. Yeah, no, I may have been inexperienced, but I wasn't about to get tricked into spending the night in a rundown hotel with someone who was clearly not who I thought she was. I left immediately. Story 27. I met a guy online. He asked me to dinner at a tapas place, and I agreed. I was bored, and he seemed nice enough. We had been texting for a couple of weeks, and everything seemed chill. I got to the restaurant, and he was late. When he finally arrived, he looked nothing like his profile picture. Easily 100 pounds heavier, bad skin, and dressed incredibly sloppy. Still, I told myself not to be shallow and tried to give him a chance. We looked over the menu, which was fantastic, by the way, and I suggested a few things I wanted to try. That's when he started listing off all the things he wouldn't eat. Sweet potatoes, aioli, capers, salmon, radish, arugula, kale, balsamic vinegar, pretty much everything except bread, meat, and cheese. Then he said he wouldn't eat any food if I ordered something with those ingredients. I told him to just get what he wanted, and I'd get something for myself. When the food arrived, he turned out to be the messiest eater I had ever seen. Crumbs, food bits, everywhere. His shirt, the table, it was painful to watch. On top of that, he kept insisting that I try his food. I'm pescatarian and lactose intolerant, so I declined. That's when he started berating me about my food choices, calling me a picky eater. When they cleared our table for dessert, things somehow got worse. He suddenly got down on one knee and tried to give me a promise ring because he felt a special bond and wanted to pledge his life to me after just a few weeks of online messaging and one terrible date. I politely declined and he immediately lost it. He started calling me names in the middle of the restaurant, then burst into tears and stormed out. So not only did I have to sit through the worst date ever, but I also had to pay for the whole meal because I didn't want to accept a pre-engagement ring from a guy I had just met. Story 28. I started talking to a girl on a dating site, and after about a week, we made plans to meet. A few hours before we were supposed to, something came up and I had to cancel. I told her I was available the next day since we didn't live in the same city. A few hours later, she messaged me and asked if I wanted to take a road trip with her to a city a few hours west. She said she just wanted a co-pilot to keep her company. I agreed, partially because I felt bad for canceling on her at the last minute the day before. I was skeptical, though. I had never taken a random road trip with someone I hadn't even met in person. She picked me up in the morning, and at first things weren't too awkward. The conversation was easy, but about 10 minutes into the drive, she suddenly said she really had to go to the bathroom. She couldn't wait for a gas station, so she abruptly pulled over on the side of the highway to do her business. Okay, not ideal, but whatever. When you gotta go, you gotta go. The trip was about 200 kilometers, roughly 125 miles, and we had to make 5 more bathroom stops, 2 more on the highway and 3 at gas stations. I started keeping count after the third one. At this point, I was wondering if she had a medical issue or something else going on. It was just a lot. She had originally told me she just needed to pick up a few things in the city we were headed to. Turns out it wasn't just things. It was her 74-year-old grandmother. Not only that, but I was also about to meet her entire family for lunch. I looked at her in disbelief and said, "You're kidding, right?" Nope. She was completely serious. By this point, I didn't have much of a choice. I was stuck because she was my ride back home. Long story short, it was beyond awkward. Her aunt, her cousin, some random family friend, and her grandma were all there. It felt like a family reunion I had somehow been dragged into. I had to improvise my way through the conversation and pretend I actually knew anything about this girl. After lunch, we finally started heading back. 4 more bathroom stops later. When I got home, I never spoke to her again. How's that for awkward? Story 29. Some backstory. I had a guy friend in high school who wanted to date me, but I wasn't interested, so I turned him down. In response, he spread rumors that I was a wild girl and into drugs. Next thing I knew, a bunch of guys were claiming they had been with me. None of it true, of course. Somehow I gained a reputation without actually doing anything. One day this guy, a big nerd, asked me out on a date. He was cute and I kind of liked him, so I said yes. I had been to his house before, so after we went out for a decent dinner, we headed back to his place to watch TV. I assumed he just couldn't afford to do much more, which was fine since I wasn't well off either. As soon as we walked in, though, I noticed something was off. His family wasn't home, and he immediately started leading me to his bedroom. He wasn't smiling, just had this serious, almost nervous look on his face. I laughed and told him, "I don't actually have a thing with everyone." I expected him to either brush it off or maybe get upset, but instead he just started crying. We ended up spending the rest of the night talking about how awful high school was and how much pressure he felt to lose his virginity. He admitted he didn't even like me that much. He actually had a girl he really liked but wanted to be experienced before pursuing her. After that, we just watched Mystery Science Theater 3000. He's still one of my friends today, but that was definitely a weird date. Story 30. Michael Che, comedian and anchor for SNL's Weekend Update, ruined one of my first dates. I go to a lot of stand-up shows around NYC, and I happened to see him trying out new material at 2 different free shows in the same week. At both shows, he did this crowd work bit about search history. Specifically, he would pick a guy in the front row and press them about what they search for when watching adult content. The first time I saw him do it, he absolutely would not let up on this poor guy. The guy clearly didn't want to answer and kept saying things like, "I don't know," or "I'm not sure," but Che just kept pressing. "Come on, man, I know you know." "What do you mean you don't know?" He seriously kept circling back to this one dude for the entire show. Cut to later that week, I'm on an OkCupid date, and we go to another stand-up show. We sit in the front row, and, of course, Michael Che turns out to be the surprise headliner. The second I see him, I know it's going to be me this time. My brain starts racing, trying to figure out how to handle this situation. I keep thinking, don't say BDMS, don't say BDMS. This was a very casual date, and I had barely been talking to this girl. I didn't want to seem weird. Sure enough, within 30 seconds, he turns to me and asks, "What about you, sir? What do you type in the search bar when you look for, you know?" I panic and try to stall with a, "Who, me?" But he just repeats the question. I need to say something safe, so I blurt out the most innocuous answer I can think of. "Redheads." Whew, I think I'm in the clear, crisis averted. Then I remember, my date is a redhead. Of course, Michael Chi picks up on this immediately. "You know the girl sitting next to you is a redhead, right?" I nod and reply, "Yes, we are. Actually, here on a date." He pauses for a second, then laughs. Wow, this has never happened during this bit before. Thankfully, he cuts me some slack and moves on. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad. The date wasn't going spectacularly anyway, so it wasn't a huge loss. But it made the rest of the evening very awkward. When she later said no to a second date, I was actually relieved. I immediately texted her, "That's fine. Oh my God, can we talk about how awkward that was?" She replied, "I know." Story 31. This was a second date with someone I met on Tinder. Our first date had been pretty typical. We met up for drinks at a local bar, stayed for a couple of hours, and had good chemistry. We made out a little during the walk afterward, but since we both had 6 a.m. alarms the next morning, we went our separate ways. For the second date, she invited me to a taxidermy museum in Gowanus. I just found out that this place has since closed, but its motto was something along the lines of exploring the intersections of death, beauty, and that which falls between the cracks. It was essentially a hipster capitalist museum that was really just a glorified gift shop, full of dead things for sale, whether stuffed, skeletal, or preserved in jars. Most of it was way outside my price range. The basement, however, was another experience entirely. It seemed to have retained the building's original climate control system, or more likely, had none at all. That meant that, on a cold winter night filled with 30 to 40 people, the temperature was surprisingly comfortable, but the humidity was about 250%, making the place feel like a damp dungeon. The occasion? A lecture given by a traveling professor on the subject of prostitution in France during the interwar period. It consisted mainly of a slideshow filled with very compromising historical images. It was, without a doubt, one of the most informative and memorable dates I've ever had. Story 32. I was running out of options for single girls in my area and ended up agreeing to meet a girl simply because she had a talking parrot. I thought that was pretty cool, and since I had nothing better to do, I figured a Saturday pub lunch with company was better than eating alone. Plus, I might get to see a parrot talk. So I drove an hour to her town, and we met at the place she chose. She was nice enough, and the conversation never got awkward, but the whole time, I was just trying to figure out how to angle for an invite back to her place, solely to see the bird say something hilarious without coming across as creepy. At some point, I casually brought up the parrot, just to test the waters. The second I did, I could tell I had set off some kind of warning alarm in her head. The conversation became noticeably shorter and more distant after that. I took the hint, paid for her meal, and we left it at that. Before we parted ways, I asked if she wanted to meet up again in my town. She hesitated and said, "Oh, that's kind of far, isn't it?" "Yeah, bye-bye, parrot girl. At least the food was good." Story 33. Oh, I have a good one for this. I met this girl at a social event on campus once. She was cute, quirky, and really into art. She kept talking about her creative projects, and I, trying to impress her, said something like, "I love art too," which was mostly true, but let's be real. I mainly liked that she had two very well-proportioned reasons to be interested in art. She invited me back to her place to check out her paintings and do some finger painting. That sounded promising. I drove her back to her apartment, and as we arrived, she told me to park anywhere because there were no assigned spots. Great. We went inside and she started showing me her artwork before pulling out some paint. Turns out, finger painting was literal, not a euphemism. But hey, I wasn't going to let a little thing like actual art ruin my night. So there we were, painting and flirting in her bedroom. At one point, I playfully put a little paint on her nose. She laughed and did the same to me. Everything was going great. Then the phone rang. She had paint all over her hands, so I grabbed it for her and answered, "Hello, cute weird girl's residence." On the other end, a voice growled, "Who the hell is this?" I paused. This is my name. Who's this? This is her boyfriend. Put her on the phone. I handed her the phone with my jaw practically on the floor. She took it, still all smiles, and casually said, "Yeah, we're painting. You should come hang out." "Excuse me?" I glanced at my phone. Oh, wow, look at the time. 1 a.m. What a perfect excuse to leave immediately. I made some polite excuse and started heading for the door. That's when I realized my car was gone. I went back and knocked on her door. Turns out the parking lot had a strict no pass, no parking rule after midnight. And since we had been so busy painting and apparently waiting for her boyfriend to arrive, she forgot to mention that. And of course, she didn't have a car, which meant she couldn't take me to the impound lot. So guess who got to wait for her boyfriend to arrive? She introduced us, casually explained the situation, and then he, without saying much, drove me to the impound lot, just the two of us. The entire ride was the most painfully awkward silence I have ever experienced. He didn't even turn on the radio. When we finally arrived, the only employee was out on a tow job, meaning I had to wait even longer. That's when the boyfriend finally looked at me and asked, "Do I need to wait?" Now, this place looked like the kind of location where people mysteriously disappear, but at that moment, the thought of spending one more minute in awkward silence with him was even worse. So I said, "Nah, I'm good." He left and I stood there alone until the tow guy showed up 20 minutes later. I paid $60 to get my car back and in the process, learned a very valuable lesson. Story 34. Back in my days of frequently using Tinder, I went on a mix of dates, some with genuinely nice people and others with complete wildcards. One guy, who happened to be my first ever Tinder date, commented about 15 minutes and that he preferred girls without makeup, while making wiping motions at my face. That was off-putting enough. But later, I found out that his job was one of those people who stand on the street with an iPad and ask if you have a few minutes to take a survey. That just added to his already incredible charm. Then there was a girl I met on Tinder who, also within 15 minutes of meeting, asked what I was looking for on the app. Before I could even answer, she casually informed me that she had a boyfriend, something she failed to mention in our chats, who wasn't really okay with her dating around. But what could he really do? Later that night, she invited me back to her house to meet her cats. I wasn't sure if this was some kind of innuendo, but I politely declined. I've also lost 2 different articles of clothing, a perfect Kurt Cobain-style green cardigan and a vintage Breakfast Club-style denim jacket at guys' places. My fault for leaving them, but both guys completely ignored my very polite request to, "Please just find my clothes, and I'll leave you alone. I do not want another date. I just want my wardrobe back." To this day, both pieces remain missing. But the real highlight was Jack. Jack was a seemingly sweet, nerdy guy who, after a few drinks, he had a much lower alcohol tolerance than I did, admitted that he was an online drug dealer making about $5,000 a week. He only sold substances he believed wouldn't cause harm to people, like cannabis and mushrooms. Despite that revelation, Jack turned out to be one of the most interesting and intelligent people I've ever met. We talked for hours about philosophy, literature, traveling, and the difference between money washing and laundering. One night, he even described, in great detail, how he had stolen a GoPro from his old job in a Mission Impossible-style heist. He altered the stock count, hid it inside a box, placed that box in the garbage, memorized the security guard's routine, and then snuck back in at night to retrieve it. I went on 2 more dates with him out of sheer curiosity. He kept me entertained. Jack is now dating a lovely hippie girl and recently took a trip to Iceland. I gave up Tinder late last year. No regrets, but I do sometimes miss the sheer weirdness of it all. Story 35. I was dating this girl for a while and found out she had never been camping or even had the chance to properly look up at the stars in a place without city lights. So I planned a perfect night, a little picnic at a campground about an hour from the city. I booked a campsite so we could stay as late as we wanted. We weren't staying overnight since we both had things to do the next day. I bought her favorite wine, packed a cooler with ice, brought wine glasses, snacks, firewood, blankets, chairs, flashlights. I even remembered the corkscrew. We got there, and the gates were closed. No staff in sight. Neither of us had been to this campground before, and by then, it was already dark. I checked the information booklet and saw that our campsite was only a short 1.5-mile hike through the woods. So there we were, in pitch-black darkness, hauling a ridiculous amount of gear up a hill through bear-infested forests. The campground did have wheelbarrows placed there for convenience, for a $10 fee, of course. So I loaded everything in and pushed it through the trail. Somehow she stuck it out with me and actually seemed genuinely happy to do it. When we finally reached the site, we unpacked and ended up having an amazing time. For some reason, she's still dating me. I have a few other stories with her, and I'm sure I'll continue to collect more. My dating game just isn't what it used to be. Story 36. Oh, I have a good one. This was about 15 years ago. I can't remember exactly how I met this particular young lady, but I think it was some kind of setup. I also don't remember her name. We agreed to meet in Cow Hollow, a neighborhood in San Francisco near the bay. We didn't make any specific plan, just a casual walk or coffee, something low-key. It was a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. We started walking and chatting. It wasn't electric, but it also wasn't painfully awkward, somewhere in between. Eventually, we meandered down to Marina Boulevard, which is lined with old, elegant houses overlooking the bay. As luck would have it, that day happened to be an open house event. Homeowners had set up viewings for potential buyers, and real estate agents were stationed at the doors. These were very expensive homes, so agents usually discouraged people who didn't seem like serious buyers. On a whim, we decided to go inside one of the houses. After all, how often do you get a chance to casually browse a multi-million-dollar Victorian? That's when things took a turn. The agent immediately assumed we were a couple. We were both in our early 30s, well-dressed, and apparently passed whatever sniff test she used to weed out non-serious buyers. Instead of correcting her, we just went with it. And suddenly we were in deep, pretending to be an established couple searching for our future home. Neither of us had planned this. The story just kept escalating on its own. I casually mentioned that I had a bowling night with my friends and always left my ball and shoes right inside the door, much to her frustration. She, in turn, lamented that her mother often visited and tended to overstay her welcome for weeks on end. The more the agent led us through the house, the more ridiculous our imaginary life became. We were basically improvising a long-form comedy bit, but with zero time to discuss it in advance. It went on for about 30 minutes before we finally wrapped it up and left. I walked her back to where we met, and we said our goodbyes. At some point during the day, she mentioned that she was really focused on her career and wasn't looking for anything serious. I wasn't looking that hard either, so it all worked out. I never got any weird vibes from her, and I don't think she got any from me, but we never spoke again. I honestly can't remember if I ever tried to follow up or if I just let it go. Story 37. I went on two particularly memorable dates. The first was with a crazy cat guy. It became clear pretty quickly that he wasn't into me at all when we met. But instead of making the most of the date, he completely clammed up. This guy had no hobbies. He didn't read, didn't watch TV, didn't play video games, nothing. The only thing he did was work and pet his cat. That was his entire life. I was young and way too eager to please, so I stuck it out for 3 hours, desperately trying to make conversation. Unfortunately, the only topic available was his one cat, who wasn't even that special to begin with. Then there was the much older gentleman, my first experience with online dating. Thank God I had the sense to meet in a public place, because he gave off seriously creepy vibes. On the surface, he seemed polite, and we had engaging conversation, but something about him was just setting off alarm bells in my head. At one point, he casually bragged about being exceptionally healthy and not needing any medication. 20 minutes later, he pulled out a pencil case from his bag, brimming with pills, and popped one like it was nothing. I immediately wrapped up the date and got out of there as fast as I could. Also, I made absolutely sure that I never took my eyes off my drink for even a second. Yeah, gay dating isn't all fun and excitement.